Hi, I'm Katie,
And I'm Ginny.
and we're so happy that you're tuning in today. Change is happening at lightning speed, and now more than ever, our horses and their ability to navigate change can help guide us through these challenging times. We're going to talk about navigating change on this episode of Leading with Instinct.
This is the Leading with Instinct podcast, focusing on intuitive leadership and fostering deep team connections through equine experiential leadership development and coaching. Brought to you by KatieTheCoach.com and the Collaboration Partners. Now, here's your hosts, Katie Navarra-Bradley and Ginny Telego.
Welcome, everyone. I am Katie Navarra-Bradley, and I'm a leadership coach and professional facilitator based in upstate New York. I believe that success isn't just about what you know, it's about being adaptable, understanding communication styles, and breaking through self-limiting beliefs.
And I'm Ginny Telego. I'm the CEO of the Collaboration Partners and a professional coach and facilitator based here in Colorado. And I believe that the key to achieving our fullest potential is collaboration. And so my work specializes in leveraging collective synergy to empower individuals and organizations to reach their highest potential.
And Ginny and I are excited to be here today with our second episode. If you missed our pilot, please go back and listen. But today we are going to talk about the challenges that leaders and their teams are facing with this rapid and complex change that is happening in their organizations and just the broader environment of what's going on today. We're also going to share insights on how horses are intuitively wired to respond to change and how you can leverage some of their natural behaviors to help you develop resilience during these unprecedented times of change.
Yes, we're really delighted to be here together to have some authentic conversation around change. And so I know just the word change can create anxiety. And our current reality is that there's just a lot of change happening to a lot of people very quickly. And it's just kind of a swirl. So we all know for the past 5 years in particular that change has been happening at a really high rate in multiple environments, our personal lives, our professional lives. This has been creating confusion and disorientation for a lot of us of what direction do we go, because we think are going to go in a direction and then something shifts and we have to regroup. So now change is happening at a more exponential rate than it has been. And so what we're seeing, I know in our work, is leaders and teams are just getting exhausted trying to keep up with what's happening. So we know that staying ahead of change is necessary, but it can really seem impossible. So I know when Katie and I first started talking about this topic, a big change that was happening is this coming back into the office, right? We're hearing about companies, a lot of companies that were starting to put in mandates for their people to return to the office 5 days a week. And this is creating a lot of challenges for a lot of people having, worked remotely or even in hybrid environments. So we were going to explore that. But now, honestly, in the last couple of weeks, we know there's been really a tsunami of change with all the cuts to the federal workforce, and knowing that impacts a lot of other people. So it's not just the people who, are in the federal workforce that they lose their jobs, but there's a lot of other businesses that are connected, and even just in our communities, small businesses in our communities that support the people who live there. And so there's a lot of, it's like a domino effect, right? And so we thought we'd kind of not really get into exploring that particular thing a lot, but this idea around, how do you navigate change when it's happening? And it's really hard when it happens to you, right? Sometimes we create the change, it's willing, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But when it's not something that you've chosen, that creates some whole other challenges. So Katie, what are some of the challenges that we're seeing people dealing with as it relates to change?
Ginny, that's a great question. I kind of think of all of this change as, we talk about quantum computing and how fast quantum computing is going to make processing. And I feel like we're in this age of quantum change, right? Just that it's happening to us, like you said, much faster than we are prepared for. And we're seeing that leaders at all levels of the organization are being tasked with figuring out how to support their people. The leaders themselves have not had advance notice that this change is coming. They are empathetic and they want to support their people. Their hands are often tied as to what they can do and how much notice they can get. And then when, this change is happening because they aren't making the bigger decision, they're not involved in the bigger vision that's being communicated, there's a lot of anxiety and tension that's going along with that. And, to be quite honest, all of us are being faced with figuring out how are we going to manage our fears, because it's more than just the change. These changes are so large and so widespread that there's a lot of fear and anxiety associated with this change. So Ginny, what have you seen as far as, fear not being made up, being this real feeling that we need to address when we talk about change?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I experience myself sometimes, and I know lots of people that I work with experience this as well, that when we feel fear about the unknown, we want to kind of talk ourselves out of it, right? And we sometimes will try to downplay it, like, oh, why am I making such a big deal out of this? Or the I shoulds, right? I should be able to deal with this. I should be able to figure out a solution. And all of those things, it just creates more chaos for us. Because the reality is fear, it's very real. It's not made up. It's something that our brain does, and it's there for a reason. It's there to bring our attention to paying attention to what's happening around us. And so it's kind of like it's a prompt for us to some extent, right? To pay attention. What's happening and what can you do about it? And so I think just understanding that when your brain is in that place of the unknown, you then start looking for something familiar. That's the way our brain works. When something comes up that is not familiar to us, and we kind of go, oh gosh, what is this? Our brain naturally starts going, if you find all these files, like when you open your computer, to open your drive, right? And you go in and you're like scrolling through all your folders to find that one file that you need. Well, that's really what your brain is doing when something happens that is unfamiliar. And so when your brain can't find something relevant, that's when we start to feel a little bit of anxiety. And so when that anxiety starts to kick up, right, that causes our energy to come up. And we sometimes, right, there's physical anxiety attacks are very real for people. And what happens when we become anxious, our energy starts to go up and up and up and up. And the more that happens, if we don't find ways to bring it back down and regulate ourselves, that's when it can just kind of spiral out of control and we become exhausted. And I think that's a little bit of kind of where people are, right? I mentioned that earlier, that people are just sort of exhausted from trying to figure out what direction to go with all the change happening. And so, the problem is if we become so conditioned to reacting to change all the time, as opposed to taking every change sort of one piece at a time and, evaluating it and discerning how to respond, we become just completely exhausted. Our energy reserves are depleted. And then what happens is we're too tired to respond to a change that really might be a threat to us, right? So, yeah.
Those are all excellent points, Ginny. And I think it's also worth mentioning, we're talking about big change that's going on right now and happening to people's lives that are affecting their livelihood and their families. But I also think it's important that change can affect all of us in different ways. And sometimes I know that this has happened to me before, like things have been difficult for me. And I always feel bad about talking about them when, my problems feel like they're a first world problem when other people are going through things that are more significant. And I think that it's also really important that we recognize how change is affecting us, even if we don't think that it's that significant compared to what others are going through. It can still create that same sort of anxiety and fear within us that really needs to be addressed before we can be a better part of our communities and our workplaces.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point of, again, kind of goes back to that idea that sometimes when we are feeling the fear of the unknown and we try to talk ourselves out of it, and it's very easy to say, well, okay, what's happening to me isn't as bad as what's happening to someone else. the challenge with that is for us, our brain is experiencing what we're experiencing.
Exactly.
And so sometimes it's even just a matter of acknowledging it. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit later in our conversation. But, along with all these changes that everybody's trying to manage, we're still also trying to just take care of ourselves day to day, right? Make sure that we're doing what we need to take care of ourselves. Like, did I remember to take a shower today? And try to take care of our families and our horses and our pets and all the things that we have to take care of. So in line with our purpose, right, of infusing some instinctual learning into our podcast and conversation and this learning from the horses, Katie and I wanted to share some ways that the horses have shown us how to respond to change that doesn't deplete our energy reserves. So Katie, I want to go ahead and kind of share a little bit.
Sure. So today we're going to talk a little bit about big change for both of us. Ironically, we both moved in 2024. Ginny moved halfway across the country with her horses, and I moved 7 miles down the road with my horses. And we had some very different experiences with how we thought our herds were going to handle change, how we approached making them feel comfortable and preparing for that change. And as a result, the outcomes of how things happened when we actually got settled or arrived in our new locations. Ginny, do you want to share a little bit about your move?
Yeah, absolutely. So my move was voluntary. We decided quite a while ago, my husband and I have been talking about moving out west because we both had lived out here previously in our previous lives. And so circumstances have led to, that being something we could do because we both are very fortunate, get to work remotely. And so we had started looking for properties out in Colorado a couple years ago. And so, we had looked, not really finding what we wanted. And so the end of August of last year, we closed the window on moving in 2024 because moving across the country with horses, dogs, a cat, plus our stuff, it's kind of a big project to organize. And I didn't want to be moving my horses across the country in the winter time. And so I sort of had a hard stop to move by December the 1st. Well, as you know, it takes time, right, to buy a house, sell a house, go through all the things, packing, all the things that are involved in that. So we kind of were like, well, if we don't find a place by the end of August, we'll just wait and we'll start looking again next year. It wasn't a big deal. We were perfectly fine at our place in Ohio. So we mentally had closed the book on moving last year. And then in the middle of September, our realtor sent us a property. And we both were just like, oh my gosh, I think we need to explore this. And I can tell you that even just the thought of it at that point in time, it started to create some anxiety for me because I started, before we even had done anything on it, I started going in my mind of like, okay, if we were to do this now, I got to get this and this, all these things I've got to get organized. And I'm traveling a bunch in between now and December. So that cuts down. I really only have 6 weeks potentially to plan this and make this move. And so my anxiety started coming up and because there was a lot of unknowns. Who's going to transport my horses? What's the weather going to be like? How are we going to get everything all packed up? All those lists of things started happening. So long story short, we put in an offer on the property, which was accepted. And then 6 days later, our house in Ohio was sold. So within a span of 8 days, we went from we're not moving to we're moving in a couple of months. And so as you can imagine, there was just a lot happening for that. And what's interesting, so my horses were really picking up on the energy that I was putting out. So even though I thought I was doing a really good job of keeping it under control, when I would go out to take care of my horses and put them out, they were giving me feedback that there was something that was not in alignment for me. So knowing that information, I had to acknowledge out loud with my horses what was happening for me. And so while the moving piece was a big piece of this process, I also I had to rehome 2 of my horses because I couldn't bring all of them with me. So I was able to rehome my horses with a very, very dear friend of mine who also does equine assisted learning. So I knew they were going to a great place. My other horses didn't know that information. They didn't know that 2 really important members of their team were leaving and they didn't know where they were going, and they didn't realize they weren't coming back. And in a herd of horses, because horses are, very community oriented, when you take horses out of an established team, it creates a lot of anxiety for those horses because now they've got to figure out who's going to fill in those roles. Because one of my minis that I rehomed was my lead mare. So now my lead male horse of my herd now was left without his lead mare, right? Who they were co-responsible for keeping the herd safe. So there were a lot of these shifts happening. And then on top of it, I put my horses on a trailer and transported them across the country. Now, it was a very good trip. I was very fortunate to be able to transport them with a professional hauler on a very nice trailer. But they don't understand, right? All they knew was they were being moved from what was familiar. And then transporting, they have no idea what's happening when they're on the trailer. They don't know where they're going. They don't even know, is there a turn coming? We don't know that. And so, I got them out here, and it took several days for them to acclimate into their new environment. And I had a lot of anxiety about that. I felt really guilty in a lot of ways about separating my team in that way. I felt guilty about taking them away from what was familiar. There was a lot of change happening for all of us. And so inevitably, though, because horses have an incredible amount of change resilience, once they became familiar with their new environment, they were fine. And I mentioned in our intro podcast, right, of how they nap now every day between 10 and 1, sometimes again later in the afternoon. And so for horses to lay down and nap like that, they need to feel safe. So what ended up happening, right, as the team leader, I had to acknowledge that there was uncomfortableness for all of us. We were all feeling the fear and anxiety associated with the change. But I then also had to trust that my team members were able to access their instincts to be able to navigate the change so that it didn't wear them down. And they did. So it's a great lesson learned for me.
I remember when we were talking about this podcast, about this episode, you were saying, "Oh, I'm sure you had some of the same thoughts when you were planning to move." And I said to you, our decision to move was voluntary as well. Our herd had grown from 1 to 3 horses, and we decided that it was time to have them out back and invest in our own property. And I've had horses all my life. They had been living together. I really didn't think it was going to be a big deal, especially because the horse I've owned the longest has traveled to competitions out of state. She's been away at training several months at a time with trainers, both in town and out of state. I couldn't have been more wrong about how they reacted to the change. When we first moved, so my oldest is Bella, and we also have her son Winston, who's 2. He was about 18 months old at that time. And when we moved the 2 of them, they were actually pretty content. All of a sudden they had this huge lush pasture with more grass than they could probably eat. And then 2 weeks later, I brought our 3rd horse home. His name's Leroy. He had been down with a trainer in West Virginia for 7 months. Mm-hmm. I thought, hey, they all lived together before Leroy went to West Virginia. They lived in a larger herd with 5 horses, but they'd all lived together, been shuffled around together. Well, when we put them all together in our new property, their team dynamics had changed. Bella got super protective of her quote unquote baby, even though they had been weaned and separated. And they all got out within 2 weeks of being together. And also their demeanors changed. Bella, who was this real laid back, easygoing horse that really never seemed to be fazed by anything. We used to be able to leave her alone while other horses left the property. All of a sudden turned into this fire breathing dragon. Still to this day, if we start up equipment, she'll snort and, let it run and let us know that she is irritated that, this is her new home. Leroy, after having lived in a stall for 7 months, which is common with training, this horse was not afraid of anything. And all of a sudden he became afraid of his own shadow, rabbits at night. And so we had to now split up our herd and find ways for them to coexist. And the two boys have been laying down and enjoying their space here. I feel like now that they're in the groove, they have accepted this change and they're pretty happy. And Bella still, I texted you, 2 weeks ago? She finally, for the first time since August, I caught her napping in the middle of the day, which was a big thing. But it's interesting how we can, as leaders, we can take different approaches to change. You were really aware of how this big shift in your life and in your business was going to impact those on your team. And I just thought, they have been with me through change before, that this would just be another change that they could roll with. And boy, did they show me that that's not the case, that sometimes we need to give more support than what we may have realized. The other really interesting thing that I realized is that the youngest horse, Winston, has really been the most accepting of the change. Other things that fluster the two other horses around him, he's just like, hey, what's going on? He loves playing with this ball that we have for him in the pasture. And it's really made me think about how we talk about our young employees in the corporate and workplace. Because a lot of time our younger generations get blamed with, we've all read the headlines, right? Like, they don't have a work ethic, they're lazy, they can't adapt to change. But when given the opportunity and really looking at what they can contribute to a situation, we might be surprised if we look past some of those stereotypes or what we're hearing around us, because they could just be the one that we need to lead us through this moment of uncertainty that we're dealing with ourselves.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And you're right. I think it is a matter of leaders and even just people in general understanding what is their natural propensity to change, right? Like you said, for me, I really was thinking it through of all these things, because when I realized that I was only going to be able to take 2 of my horses, I started thinking about, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to manage this? This is going to be really hard on my herd to lose the lead mare and 2 really important team members. And I was thinking about all of those things. And for you were basing your assumptions on previous information, right? Because that's what assumptions are based on, is what we've seen previously. And so being aware of that, I think, is important, of understanding like what's your starting point in it. And I think for me, the thing about all of the change that we've experienced, that the horses have really instilled with me this idea of change resilience, right? And being okay with not knowing. That's something that has really come to the forefront for me with the horses. Horses don't think about the future. So they have 2 choices. They can expend all their energy all day long worrying because they don't know what's going to happen next, or they can choose this place of in the horse world of idea of relaxed readiness. So this is a term that was a colleague of mine, June Gunter, shared, and I thought is so powerful, because it's thinking about how do you prepare for change. Because change always happens. It's not like change wasn't happening before. Mm-hmm. Our lives, from the moment that we're here, change is happening. It just is a situation where the type of change, is different once you are getting further down the road, and your circumstances change from one place to another, right? At some point in time earlier in your life, hopefully you have other people around you that can support you in the change, right? Like you're going to a new school, right? So hopefully you have family who can support you in that and help you navigate through it. Later on, it's all up to you for the most part, how to navigate those things. But it's still important to have people around you. And when you have people around you, I think that's how you can be in this place of relaxed readiness. You can be aware of the environment, but not having to react to every little thing. And so when I really have thought about this, especially since the move, I've been practicing how can I be more comfortable in the not knowing. And it takes a lot. I have to constantly be telling my brain, I'm like, it's okay if you can't find that file. It's okay, right? We'll figure it out. And so I look at it from this place of energy, and where do I want to put my energy? Where do I need to put my energy? And I think it comes back to, right? Remember, I mean, long ago, I don't even know what year that saying came out, right? Don't sweat the small stuff. It's been around a long time, so I've just aged myself. But I've thought about that, right? Because every day, like my horses are in the open. There are coyotes around. There's a wolf somewhere in the vicinity here that I just found out about. There's a lot of uncertainty around my horses in their environment every day. But they don't spend all day using energy to worry about it. They focus on what's happening right now and what do I need to do to respond. Do I need to respond with a lot of energy? Is this something that is potentially really dangerous for me and I need to like respond fast and strong? Or is it something small and minor that I can just say, that's a little bit uncomfortable. I'm just going to move. I'm going to go over here until that other thing dissipates. And so for me, that's kind of what the horses have brought to my ability to navigate through change.
I love the term relaxed readiness. I had not heard that before. And as you were saying that, one of the things that really made me think about that I've been going down this deep rabbit hole with is AQ is the next skill that we need. And so What is AQ? We all know IQ, EQ is emotional intelligence. Well, AQ is this adaptability quotient. And I've heard a few futurists speak on this idea of AQ, and I have a pretty large article coming out in Success Magazine this spring that explores why AQ is the next skill we all need as leaders. Mm-hmm. And the more I've learned about AQ, the more it's really made me think about my own horses. Because to your point, they are naturally adaptable. They've been around for, millions of years, dare I say, without us being there to shepherd them through all of this change. And so thinking about how they approach different things in their environment. To your point, we have coyotes on our property as well, and they drive me insane, and my horses don't really care about them because they have assessed the energy that they need to give to them.
Yes.
And so when I think about that, we could probably talk about a whole episode about how to assess your own level of adaptability and how to strengthen that skill. But one of the things that's worked for me is, because I am a professional writer, I write about it. Once I find that topic that just really resonates, and it usually comes through my horses, and I usually have to manage that into a corporate topic, but it's one thing that really helps me explore what that change is and how it can be put to good use as opposed to just the tiredness and the anxiety that comes with it.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, really, really thinking about this ability to be adaptable, right? You can't be adaptable if you're expending your energy reacting all the time.
Exactly.
And so I wonder how can people that are listening, what are some of the things that we've been talking about that they can do to try and navigate through whatever change they might be experiencing or leading their teams through?
I think one of the biggest things that we talked about that's really important is to just acknowledge the reality that things are changing. Whether that's this big change that's tied to what's going on at levels nationwide, or it's change that's going on in your personal life. Downplaying it, whatever size the change is only going to make it harder. So acknowledge to yourself, acknowledge to those close within your support network that this change is happening and that it's impacting you.
Yeah, and I do think that's really important, right? It's just being able to say change is happening, right? And then the next piece of that is how do you be transparent about the change as much as you can? If you're in a leadership role, we all know that sometimes there's things happening that you maybe can't share with everybody on your team. And so how can you, though, figure out, this is what I know, this is what I don't know, right? That's one piece. And then also being able to maybe pick out some things once you identify what you know and what you don't know, then of the things that I know, what can I share right now, right? Because what people want when change is happening is they want some sense of certainty. That's what they want. That's what their brains want. And so when we can give them even some little tidbits of certainty, and the reality is saying, I don't know all the information, I don't have all the answers to your questions, that at least is something that people can take and go, okay, well, at least it's not completely, I'm not completely in the blind. And so being able to discern, what can I share, what, do I not share? This is about this idea of being congruent. And I think also going back to what we talked about earlier on of acknowledging the fear that might be happening, is taking care of yourself, right? And so, Katie, you had some thoughts when we were putting this together about that, about how do we take care of our own mental and physical health so that we can be able to respond to change.
Ginny, that's a great question. And I feel like our listeners are going to think this is just very obvious because we have horses, so we're outside every day.
Right.
Recently, though, I was listening to a podcast by another professional writer that I know and follow, and she was talking about how her mental state has suffered significantly since January. And for her, what she has done is carved out 10 minutes to stand on her patio every day with her coffee. Even if it's cold, even if it's snowy, even if it's rainy, whatever the weather, she's standing outside. Because she also said she never goes outside. She might go outside to walk from her desk to her car to get to a place, but never outside. And it really struck me because I thought, I spend at least 2 hours a day outside caring for my horses. And that is where I find my sense of calm. It really doesn't matter what has been going on in my daily, work with clients. I could be so stressed out, and sometimes I literally just get up and walk outside and spend, for me, it's 10 minutes with my horses, and all of the sudden that stress and anxiety melts away.
Yeah.
And even if you don't have a horse, I encourage you to get outside, even if it's 10 minutes a day. Numerous studies have shown the impact of just being in nature and what that can do for your mental health and well-being. So whether you drink coffee, tea, or have some other way that you can get outside, it really struck me to hear that from somebody who really has not spent a lot of time outside on a daily basis, how much it helped them find an inner calm to deal with some of this change that's going on.
Yeah, that's such a great point, because our brain really needs that break to keep us from spiraling into the abyss of ruminating on all the worst case scenarios, right? Because that's what happens. We start going through, where's that file? Where's that file? Where's that file? Where's that file? Why can't I find that file? Oh my gosh, did I delete it? What happened to it? And so when you can start to notice that you're going into that space, which is kind of sometimes feels like a space of helplessness, the opportunity there is that you can shift your energy, even if it's something slight, which is getting up, even if it's just getting up and walking out of your office, away from your computer, away from your phone, whatever those things are, and definitely stepping outside. There's lots of science out there about the power of just getting outside, fresh air. Do the noticing exercise. Like we have a mindfulness exercise that a lot of us do as coaches, where when our clients are kind of going into a place of anxiety, that we can say, okay, I want you to stop and just notice, what are 3 things you notice around you, right? What are 3 things you see? What are 3 things you hear? What do you feel? Any of those things. Because when you do that, it actually shifts your brain into being present, and that keeps you from ruminating on things. And, I want to share, look, I've experienced change at the hands of others. I know the fear of losing everything. And I know the anger that you feel at the people who are making the decisions that are impacting you. And it feels like they just, they didn't care at all about the impact on me and others when those things happened to my husband and I. But what I've also learned is I can choose what I do with my energy. And as I've learned to acknowledge what's happening, be congruent, say, this really sucks. I'm really, really mad. I'm real pissed off about this whole situation, right? And then say, okay, so what's the opportunity that might be in this? Because what I will share is every time I've been faced with a change that has come from outside of myself, when I've taken the opportunity to, talk to somebody, and kind of process through it, then I'm able to look at what might be possible now. It's like, oh, well, now I don't have to go do this thing. What else can I do? I can go do something that I want to, or something that's more important. I can go spend this other extra time with my kids, or whatever those things are for people. And so I guess kind of my closing on it is, if you want to shift the outcome, you do have the ability to shift your attention and your energy. And so I hope that our conversation has helped with that for people. Katie, do you have any final thoughts before we say goodbye?
I think you summed it up well. The fact that we are in control of how we think about a situation, and that in the moment change can be overwhelming, but when we see it as an opportunity, it really changes the whole energy behind it. So I appreciate you sharing that and your personal experience.
Definitely. So that's it for our conversation today. We look forward to continuing to share some insights on how we can learn to use instincts from nature to lead ourselves and others. And if you enjoyed the podcast today, please give us a like, share it with others who could use some encouragement. If you have a leadership topic that you'd like to explore with us, please send us a note on our leadingwithinstinct.com page. So until next time, stay grounded, stay connected, and always lead with instinct.
This has been the Leading with Instinct podcast, focusing on intuitive leadership and fostering deep team connections through equine experiential leadership development and coaching. The Leading with Instinct podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Collaboration Partners, harnessing the collective human potential in organizations since 2009, providing equine experiential learning for lasting change. Get in touch at thecollaborationpartners.com, and by katiethecoach.com, helping entrepreneurs and business leaders reset, reconnect, and reframe to live their best professional and personal lives. Visit katiethecoach.com for more information. For more information about equine experiential development and coaching and the Leading with Instinct podcast, visit www.leadingwithinstinct.com. The Leading with Instinct podcast is available at leadingwithinstinct.com, on the Leading with Instinct YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Subscribe today, and thank you for listening to the Leading with Instinct podcast.